And welcome back to this episode of Five Alarm Task Force, brought to you by our new corporation, Five Alarm Task Force Corp. We are one family, one mission, first responders helping each other. And we're glad to have you with us. My guest today, as I mentioned earlier, is a good friend of mine, a firefighter, a lieutenant in a Central Florida county, Lieutenant Jason Liska. And Jason and I have become, I don't know, if two guys who only met once for maybe a half hour at a fire conference. We've become very close friends. We share a lot about our experiences in the fire service, and we share a lot about life. And that's what makes him so comfortable for me to have as a guest. He's been on the show twice as a panel member, but I've been after him since last fall, almost a year, to bring him on as a guest. So Jason, welcome aboard finally. Glad to have you.
You know, my brother, it's a tremendous honor to be on the show with you today, and I feel bad that you had to chase me. This is something we have had hours and hours of dialogue over. We've just been trying to make this happen. And, you know, I remember the great debacle, and it might have been pre-COVID when we had the great meltdown of the Matrix on your side of the
Right.
planet.
Oh, yeah.
And we thought that it was the end of the world. We thought, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? And thank God for the support system and Microsoft, I guess, and everybody that was eventually able to get you back on your feet. And, you know, I know there were those moments where you thought I just lost my entire body of work and I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
But you know what? You rebounded. You rebounded like a champion.
Well, thank you. It was tough going between first losing the files themselves until I accidentally found them 13 levels below the C in your File Explorer. And I never knew. I mean, anything but code would be buried that deep. But I found that, and then I had the new changeover with the computers. That I thought I had a tech person who understood the drawing I made, understood the words I said. He repeated them back to me exactly as I said them. I thought he knew what he was doing, and I was wrong.
Well, I'm glad he didn't come to me, because I would have been like, hit Control Alt Delete and let's just call it a day, because that would have been my solution for everything. Because usually when things go wrong, it's where do you start from? The beginning. And that's where I would always typically go from. And then I'd be lost. I'd be on the conference call with whoever's in Malaysia or Indonesia or India answering the call. Hello, my name is Michael today. No, your name is not Michael, but that's okay. We'll work through that. Let's just fix my problem right now, because I need it fixed now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I didn't even get to the point of having a software problem. I was given the wrong computer. It did not.
Oh, God, yes.
The specs that I specifically outlined that I needed to have. And then when he tried to do it, not only did he do it incorrectly, but in doing so and putting a new version of Windows on my existing drive, he wiped out that level 13 things below. So I lost all of that.
What are there, 7 levels in hell, 9 levels in
I don't
hell?
know,
And you were at 13 at this point?
13, yeah.
You were at the sub level of hell at that point.
And now I'm in the abyss because they were all taken away, except where I could barely reconstruct from different places and redo and revoice. And thanks to my good friend and former partner at Dalmatian, Tom Mitten, who has stepped in to be my consultant and helpful. And he's doing some of the voiceovers now. He has a great announcer's voice from especially all his years in broadcasting and production.
Oh, yeah.
So he knows his stuff, and he's been a rock next to me, and I can't thank him enough for that. So finally, we're back here, you and I, to talk together.
Yes.
And one of our favorite subjects that we've talked about before, just not on a podcast, is the concept of leadership. And we've both seen in various formats, me from a volunteer side and you in the career side, that some people aspire to be officers or be leaders before they've even established themselves as who they are as a foundation. Everything we do in life starts with a foundation. We have to have a foundation as our jumping off point. And sometimes that foundation takes a little bit longer to put together. Sometimes it's education. Sometimes it's work experience. Sometimes it's learning, constantly learning, keeping an open mind. using whatever is out there to learn from, as we do with our podcasts. And as we've had feedback that people listen. I just got a referral to a wonderful doctor out in Washington State
Mm-hmm.
who works with firefighters. And she's been listening to the podcast and loves it. I had no idea that she was a regular listener. And now she'll be soon be a guest. So I think it's important that we talk about when is someone ready to say,
Well,
I want to make that step.
so I'm going to backtrack a little bit and share some of my history, if that's okay,
Sure.
because it'll build the foundation, so to speak. And by the way, foundational leadership is a class that I co-created with an old friend, and have actually started to rebuild again, because to me, if you're going to build a career, you have to have a foundation to start from. And so when you have that foundation, you can then start the structural components of your career. And that's where you're able to do the framing, which could be obviously your coursework, your education, your indoctrination, as my friend John Dixon would call it, into the fire service. And God bless him, he
Our
uses the
mutual
best words.
good friend, John.
People call me a wordsmith. John Dixon is the words he uses in his voice when he's like, the indoctrination of the fire service. I'm like, okay, all right, no, I get it, John. I'm intimidated already. Trust me. But when I look at my own life, and granted, I had the benefit of growing up in this profession. I had two grandfathers. They were both involved in North Riverside, Illinois, where I'm from, Chicago. Go Cubs. No offense to my New York brother here. And so one was the chief.
I'm your Boston brother.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're my
Go
Boston
Sox.
brother. Gosh darn it. You know what? I can't believe I said New York. Now I feel like a jerk, but I'll recover. I'll make it up to you. Worcester, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or around Worcester.
Worcester, Framingham.
Gosh, Darcy, I can't even say it right. I say Worcestershire sauce, but that's probably because I'm from Chicago. I don't know any better.
Every time I try to say it, all I come up with Worcestershire. I just can't say Worcestershire no matter how hard I try.
You can do it, though.
Yes,
you can try. Enunciate. Remember how we were in early days in radio? They taught us how to enunciate W, But getting back.
I'll throw in a quick story yesterday.
Go ahead, please, please.
Tom, he was helping me with the new intro for the podcast.
Yeah.
And he said, I got a question I got to ask you. I've been meaning to ask you this for a while. He says, where does elucidate come from?
Oh, gosh.
And I said, well, I'll tell you something. I didn't create it. I heard it at a conference. And it meant that as a teacher, as an instructor, you have to make sure that the people listening to you, whether it's no matter what conference it is, people listen to you, that you are getting the message across, and you have to say it in a manner that they will fully understand.
Yes.
And so he said, you must elucidate so that everything of your topic is passed on to your listeners. And I said, I just found that a great piece to put in to the opening of the show. He says, okay.
Elucidate. I'm going to look that one up. I've not used that word in my vocabulary.
Entertain.
I'm going to have to use it. I'm going to have to introduce, welcome to my ability to elucidate your entertainment value today. How about that? I don't know. I'll figure it out. I double entendre that. I apologize. But that being said, I came up in this profession, and I was very fortunate to have the exposure. My grandfather's one chief, one captain, and they taught me a lot at a young age about service. They served in World War II together. They, brought war brides back home from England, and they resided in North Riverside. And so they built a life in the fire service, which was volunteer then. And they also worked in industry, in commercial industry, building and whatnot. And that's how they built their careers. And then I had the benefit of having a sister who is in broadcasting. So I was exposed to both elements at a very young age, and was able to get into a studio or get into the discussion of the firehouse. And so when I became of age, I guess you would say 14, and I was able to do so, I joined the Explorer program in Palm Beach County, where I was for about 2 years. And it was an amazing experience, because that was just something that I felt attached to. I was really impressed with the model of the service, the premise of what firefighters do. and where the backgrounds of these people, or the backgrounds of these people, where they came from, all walks of life, some legacy, some just walking into it out of college, which was not even a discussion. College, by the way, was not even a thing back then. There were very few and far between in the 90s and then early 2000s, right? But when I graduated high school, I did go into broadcasting, and I started doing overnights, and I started doing shows and board hopping. I was doing a Saturday night show with a friend of mine, Brad Jeffries, who's now in Tennessee, and he had a morning show for a long time up there as well. And so I learned a lot from that. I learned how to communicate growing up, and then that just broadened my horizons. But at the same time, I joined the volunteers. Now, mind you, I'm 18, 19 years old. And so, something I remember that will always stick with me, I didn't quite have my foundation firmly sealed in yet. I didn't have it, it wasn't properly hardened yet. It was still growing, it was still building. I came into leadership early. I became a lieutenant, and I was working in administration. I was actually one of the few that was able to help recreate a mentoring program, which was really early on. We brought people into the volunteers. We were able to show them our expectations and build them up in a 3-month and a 6-month and a 9-month fashion type thing. And then I became a captain in training, and that's where I realized now was my biggest mistake because, well, one, I was a volunteer. And I'm not knocking volunteers. I had no leadership pedigree leading into that role. So if you could imagine what it was like for now a 19, 20-year-old kid to be handed a badge, and in all reality, the badge is meaningless unless the character is behind it. I
Absolutely.
I learned a lot of hard lessons because I was a very um, demanding, very direct, very abrasive person, because I felt that's what a leader had to be. And I felt that that was the only way to get the point across. And it really started to create my own island for me, where I was exiling people and I was left. Okay, I was the last one. And it wasn't getting voted out. It wasn't being the survivor necessarily in a good way. And I had to face a group of my peers, because they wanted me removed from the volunteers. And now I'm 20 years old, 21 years old at this point, and there was a hard lesson there to be learned. And that's just one of a few significant lessons I've learned in my life, about being humble. And I've never really shared that side of the story, and I'm kind of glad I'm doing it today, because it leads to the premise of where we're going to go next. So now, fast forward, I worked in dispatch. We ended up moving here to North Florida, and I got engaged with the volunteer service in Keystone. I ended up getting a job at Putnam County in 2000, where I became an EMT, a medic, and then a firefighter. And so that was a really great time in my life. It was the opening of the door to mentoring, right? So I got involved in labor. I was very engaged in union activity. I was doing all of the work I could to become someone influential eventually. I became a union secretary, eventually the vice president, the president, and I learned a lot in that 8 years. I had some really strong mentors, people not just on the labor side, but on the management side too, that developed deep relationships with me, that saw potential in me. And I think that's the thing people need to remember. There's potential in everyone. You just have to be able to recognize that. You have to be able to focus on that, because far too often we look at people and we take them at face value versus taking the time to get to know them, right? So people were willing to invest in me. And so here we go. I had not made rank. I tested. I did make the end of the list there. I ended up leaving, going to Lake County in 2000, or 2008 rather. So here we go, starting over again. And those 4 years, 5 years, were probably the most difficult 5 years of my life. And so here I am thinking that I had all this leadership experience, that I had all of this awesome background, and I could do anything. I could take on the world. My connections would help support me. Well, here's the thing I failed to forget. I forgot about the two things that mattered most: appreciation and humility. Appreciation for the job, and a humility that was demanded of me as a public servant. And not just that, but as a new member of a department. So when I felt that I had walked in ready to take on the world, what I realized is I was an arrogant little punk who didn't know any better. And it created a lot of problems for me. So here I am thinking, well, I'm done with the fire service. I don't want to do this anymore. And I was 1 foot out the door. I think I've shared this story with you, and I've shared it many times. And it was my mentors that got me there. It was my mentors that believed in me. The few firefighters and officers, and even a few of the chiefs that didn't give up on me, that kept me on track. So here's the thing. Now I'm 43 years old, right? And I didn't get promoted until I was 40. It was October 3 years ago. And so here's the thing. What makes a person a leader? How do you use your experience to get to that point, first and foremost? And for me, I realized two things that helped me get to where I was today. One, it was failing, okay, and I failed multiple times. Two, it was almost losing my job. And three, it was learning about accountability, and it was learning about onus, because those factors had such an impact on me that if I had not listened to them, if I had not fallen on the sword, right, then guess where I wouldn't be sitting today? I wouldn't be sitting as a company officer. I wouldn't be sitting in front of this camera with you and this microphone having this discussion. And so the thing is, I ask people a lot when we talk about, are you ready? Well, what makes you think you're ready? What are you ready for? What are you looking to do with your leadership role? Are you going to be an officer that's engaging? Are you going to be an officer that's going to be demanding? Are you going to be an officer that is able to accept failure? Are you going to be someone who understands what it means that that bugle on your collar is strictly a symbol? It's not who you are. It's what's underneath that uniform that defines you. So where do we go? How do we make that decision? And a lot of it comes from being able to fall back on perspective. A lot of that comes from being able to reflect on your own failures and successes. And so when you look at Florida, all right, and Florida, and this was mentioned by my buddy Rob Rodriguez, or Rob Ramirez rather, I'm sorry, who's going to be teaching with me, and I'll mention that in a minute. He mentioned something to me the other day. He goes, Florida is a very competitive state when it comes to promotions. We're labor, we have unions, we have contracts, and most contracts say you can promote within 4 or 5 years of your career. Well, let me ask you this, Steve. Do you think 4 or 5 years is enough time for a firefighter to step up into the role of a lieutenant necessarily?
I'm going to say two things. If that firefighter has been being mentored, and in a moment I'll talk about an article I wrote. If that firefighter is being mentored and guided over those 4 or 5 years, and their mentor sees them ready to take that step, then yes. But if this is a solo decision, I think I'm ready. I'm a leader. I should be on the, was this the same person who was saying I should be on the first nozzle through the door? That's who I am. Then I'd have questions, and here's why. The article I wrote 2 years ago, published by Firehouse on the online edition, was talking about I've always seen leadership because with all the years I worked in synagogues and I did leadership training for the board. When a new board got elected, I would fly out to that community and do one of my training programs. And I said the same thing then that I wrote for the fire service, which is I treat leadership as something that we who are existing firefighters and officers and chiefs, we need to cultivate. We need to plant that seed. We look at the recruits, we look at our probies, then we look at them in their second year. And if we see them, we plant that seed in some good soil and make sure it's watered to gets its sun. And it come back a couple of weeks later, it's starting to sprout. And we're taking care of that sprout. We're guiding it. We make sure it doesn't get too much sun. We make sure it doesn't lean too far this way or that way. And from there, we get terrific leaders. It doesn't have to be an adult to a child. It can be an adult to an adult. That's what I did. I was an adult teaching other adults who had volunteered to be on and got elected to the board of directors of a synagogue.
Okay.
And I was teaching them. But the same thing applies. It's imperative that the officers who are taking in a recruit class, who are going to be over that recruit class, start watching them carefully, not for what they do wrong, what they do right, but what do they see in them that might say, ooh, this kid's got it going. She's smart.
Yep.
She's doing the right thing, or he's doing this really well.
Yep.
I gotta make a note of that on my phone and keep an eye on this kid, because this
Yep.
kid might be. And if we tend to that seed as one human to another, then we might say in those 4 or 5 years, this kid's ready to take the next step.
So I'm gonna add to that, and I'm gonna take the words of a very dear friend of mine, and one of my mentors, and someone who has pushed me from day one and has never given up on me. And his name is Donovan Miller. He's a lieutenant in my department. And I remember the first day of recruit class in Lake County, he said, "You guys are my flowers. And here's the goal. I'm going to water the flowers every day with knowledge. And I'm going to show you the way to success. But you guys have to be hungry. You guys have to be willing. You guys have to show a desire, because again, leaders are hungry. And the people that want to become leaders should be even hungrier to get to that point, because it's not an easy journey. I mean, anyone can take a class. All right. You can, and in Florida, we're required to have, well, I would say my department, I can't speak for every department, but in my department, we're required to have FO1 and FO2 minimum. No degree, but FO1 and FO2. The beautiful thing is they piggyback into a degree if you want to transfer those credits over, which is awesome. But those two certifications and 4 years are all that's required to become eligible to become a lieutenant. Now, we're going to backtrack 2 seconds, and I'm going to tell you why this matters, because 2008 was a very interesting year for our country. And then the following 5 years after that, when we were in the economic downturn, I wouldn't call it a depression, it was a recession. And I'm sure this was nationwide. I have no doubt there was an impact nationwide. But in my state, in my departments, especially in those in my community, my immediate community, I call it the great exodus of the fire service. And I keep using that term because there were so many friends of mine that jumped ship because the fire service, not by any fault of its own, not by the design of the chiefs, not by the design of the leaders of our community, by the design of the economy, public service kind of became a dead end. And there were no raises, and there were very little opportunities to grow. And then, of course, reimbursement for classes and things like that started disappearing. Morale was starting to tank. And so a lot of people coming up in my group, right? And Herb Tyler, my friend from National Rescue Consultants, talks about this quite a bit. He goes, when I came into this profession, just like Herb, there were contractors, roofers, plumbers, electricians, mechanics who all had tactile skill. They all had ability to do something outside of the fire service, right? Well, guess what most of my friends ended up doing? Well, if they couldn't get a job in a department that paid better, and some of them are miserable now that they did that. They wish they hadn't gone to that big department where they're a number versus the department they left where they were a person, okay? And they had a name and we knew each other and we were family and bonded. They went into the building industry. Surprisingly, I had one friend go become a crane operator, moved out of state. And it was within that 5-6 years, I remember it was roughly 2013, he came back to the fire service. He said, "I'm done. I needed to get back into it. This was the wrong decision." And some did come back, but this is the problem. Mentoring has to start somewhere, okay? And what we lost in that exodus was 5 to 15 year guys, when you think about it, guys and girls.
Sure.
And those 5 to 15 year guys and girls were the ones that weren't necessarily officers. They might have been drivers in their department, stepping up into that role of officer every now and then, but they were still valuable because guess what they had? They had knowledge, they had skills, they had abilities. And so here we lost that entire middle ground of the fire service. And here's the problem. Now you're left with the 20 to 30 and the 1 to 5. And
Right.
do you think that a 20 to 30-year guy wants to necessarily have to hold the hand of a 1 to 5-year guy to get them through the process?
Not at
I'm
all.
not going to speak for people in general, but
Right.
I'm going to tell you, most people wouldn't want to. They're in their heyday, they're ready to retire. So, what motivates them to want to have to sit there and spend all this time with this kid and try to teach him the ways? They're done, they're tired, they've lived their life. They just want to be left alone till they retire in some cases, not in all cases. So we really had to rebuild that middle ground, which we have. And it came right after things started turning back up and raises started coming back and departments like mine started looking more attractive and opportunities presented. And my department has grown leaps and bounds in just the last 5 years alone. And we're retaining more than we're losing. And so, guess what we're able to do? Just like with many other smaller departments, we're rebuilding that 1 to 5 year and that 5 to 10 year and that 10 to 15 year mindset. So, mentoring is slowly coming back. So that's important to remember, that you've got to have that foundation of mentoring. And so you mentioned it earlier, mentoring, like I did, is probably the most important component of being able to get that person to the next step. Well, as a leader, if you're going to make that decision to put a bugle on your collar or chevrons in some departments, depending on where you are, two things you got to remember as well. One, you've got to be willing to give of yourself. And two, you got to be willing to mentor that person or that crew or that new guy walking through the door, because they're going to depend on you. They're going to depend on you to teach them how to be you or better than you one day. So, again, when you're looking at becoming a leader, there are a lot of things you've got to examine. Are you ready for this? Number one, first and foremost, but are you ready for it because you want the bugle, like you said, or because you want to give back? You want to be a contributing member as a leader. It's not about the status. If I wasn't a lieutenant, I would be a damn good senior firefighter, because I learned my lesson even before I became an officer, and everything that I had to do. And it was double time. It was harder because I had to do it in a shorter time frame, because I realized that the potential my chief saw in me, I had failed him. And so now I had to rise to that occasion, but I had to put my money where my mouth is. And that's another thing. If you're not willing to walk the walk of
Mhm.
the talk that you talk, then you don't want to put a bugle on your collar, because you're not going to be respected. You're not going to hold weight or credibility. And here's the thing, you're going to fail as a leader. But guess what? That doesn't mean you're not going to rise through the ranks, because anybody can take a test, anybody can pass a test, and anyone can get promoted if you put a little effort into it. But again, that doesn't define you. So why do you want to become a leader? Well, you want to become a leader because you want to help others be better than you. Bottom line. And I think that's most important.
It is. And, coming from a volunteer background, number one, and one of my best friends, who's the chief pilot up, I told you,
Hmm.
up there.
Yep. North of me. North of me.
North of
Yep.
me. And he was 18 years old when we met at the firehouse. And one of the guys, we had three caretakers, their job, 24 on, 48 off, get the first apparatus out the door,
Hmm.
day or night. And Rich and I hung out a lot of time, even though I was working. I was a professional, had a job at the synagogue as the director of education and youth.
Hmm.
Um, I spent a lot of time there, and Ruthie understood it, and she was okay with it most of the time. And two of those guys realized that Rich and I were really into it, really
Hmm.
wanted to learn.
Hmm.
And one of them especially became a really strong mentor and a dear, dear friend. And we got in October of 77. He had, his wife had their first child on Christmas Day of that December.
Oh, yeah.
And Ruthie and I made sure we had a nice present for the baby,
Hmm.
and we got a big cake for the day he came back at the firehouse. And and we're still very close friends today. He was a contributor to my book, with some of the stories that we all went on together. But without him, I never would have been the firefighter that I became. It was because of him and because of my chief, that I didn't realize at the time how much, and I didn't know it for over 30 years, what he saw in me and Rich. Rich left after three and a half years, he got hired by Metro PD in Washington, D.C., which was his hometown. And I understood that. He liked both very much. And I stayed there, and then we relocated to upstate New York. But 3 of those years, the chief picked Rich and I and our friend Roger, who was one of the caretakers, to go to the North Carolina State Fire College. And first year we went was to he called us into the office, and I said, why me? There were guys in here who've been here for years that are way ahead of me in seniority. He goes, no, I want to send you and Richard and Roger to go. So first year was basic firemanship. Second year was pump operations, and third year was high level rescue. Mm-hmm. And had I gone fourth year, it would have been officers school. And but Rich and I for years just wondered why us? We were the new kids on the block. Why would he pick us? So 3 years ago, I was up in Greensboro and had dinner with Roger and his wife, as we always do when we're there. And he said, "Speak to the chief." And I said, "He's still around?" And he says, "Yeah. He's still in the same house." I said, "Oh, hell, I'll try to get over there tomorrow." And I went over there the next day, knocked on the door, was no answer. I just heard a lawnmower kind of in the distance, but in that neighborhood, you hear it all the time. So I waited a little bit, and then I started going back to my car, and I wrote out a little note on one of my business cards. And all of a sudden, I hear, "Hey, who's that out there?" And I see the chief standing in his driveway. He had been the guy mowing his back 40. He's 80-something years old. He was out there riding his lawnmower.
Like my back 40 in the backyard right now, because I'm looking at it, and it's cut, thank God. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And he said, I said, "It's me, Steve Green." He goes, "Steve Green? Holy crap, I haven't seen you in a cow's age." And I said, he goes, "Come on in." So we went and we talked and saw his wife again. And he was a great guy when I was there. And he said to me as we're sitting there, he goes, "Do you ever wonder why I sent you and Richard to State Fire College?" I said, "Chief, we've wondered that since the day you sent us, and we don't have an answer." He goes, "Well, I'm going to tell you the answer, because you boys were going to be officers. I knew it from the get-go that you boys were going to be the leaders in our fire department had you been able to stay." He said, "You were both going to be captains. I wasn't putting you at lieutenants. I was putting you at captains." He says, "Because I saw what you had. I saw your determination to learn."
Yeah.
How many calls you answered, Stephen. Even with all you working 60 hours a week, you still made over 75% of the calls that we had. He says there was nobody else in this department who was showing that sort of interest and that sort of commitment to a volunteer department like the two of you. So to me, that's where I really found that seed concept. That's what he saw in us from the get-go. And I didn't have any fire background. All my background was with the Red Cross. I got every Red Cross badge that had to do with water that they had. And it was just by chance. I never planned to be a firefighter. It just happened that day I was driving by. I saw a red brick building with nice shiny red trucks in it.
Yep.
And as I did in greater Boston area for years, I stopped in to take a look, not knowing that the captain was going to meet me. And then he introduced me to the chief, and I walked out 10 minutes later with an application in my hand.
And it was over. It was done right there.
I had to explain that to my wife when she got home from work that night. But that was it. That was it. And, I still define myself as a firefighter. That it's part of who I am as a person.
It is who you are. Okay. And don't ever deny that. Don't ever deny that. You are a firefighter. I don't care if you volunteer. I don't care if you're part-time. I don't care if you're paid. If you're going to give of yourself in this capacity, remember, you volunteer to serve in the military to serve your country. You can volunteer in your community to serve or volunteer in your fire department to serve your community. So that is the greatest gift you can give back. And something I took from what you had said, the way your fire chief had explained to you that your dedication and your drive, well, that was also an underlying factor. There was an underlying factor of maturity there. Okay. And that's another thing I want people to understand. When I was speaking with them in that podcast with Rob Ramirez and Herbie and Greg, we talked about maturity. And so when are you ready? Here's another thing to look at. Are you mature enough to step into that role? Because now you're making decisions, okay? You're actually at the lowest level of human resource management. And I've used that over and over again, because when you think about it, at the level of firefighter, people manage you. All right. At the level of driver, you're quasi management because you're technically the next up to ride up. But
Right.
when you're in that right seat, guess what? You're at the lowest level of human resource management. And that takes a lot of maturity, a lot of patience. That takes a lot of consideration. Are you going to fly off, the handle if something goes wrong versus stepping back? Gary Ludwig and I have talked many times about this. Where he's been engaged with differing fire chiefs and departments he's worked for, between obviously St. Louis, Memphis, and not in Champaign. He loves Champaign. He's never said anything bad, obviously, about Champaign. He loves that department. He loved Memphis. He's never said anything bad about any of his departments. But
Right.
in his book, and it's there in his book, and if you've ever read any of his books, he talks about some of the leaders that he engaged with at the deputy chief level who were so quick to go, let's reprimand, let's reprimand, let's reprimand. And so, is that a maturity or lack of maturity? Is that a necessity? Is that a fallback? Because if you're going to put that bugle on your collar, the only way to learn is to discipline. Well, that's something else you have to evaluate. So it doesn't matter. Are you 24 and ready, 32 and ready, or 42 and ready? There has to be a basis in that foundation, something to help solidify it even further, that your maturity is ready, that you're ready to embrace the ability to be that human resource manager, because you're not only managing the crew, you're managing their personal needs, you're managing their day-to-day lives, you're managing their operational abilities, their training, you're giving them everything, the tools for success. And so that is something that you have to have patience, maturity, and a level of compassion for, because you have to be compassionate towards your crew too when they screw up. You can't make every mistake a worrisome event where they're going to think, oh my God, I'm going to get fired or I'm going to get written up because of it. It can't be that way. You can't be that officer. So if that's another reason why you're going to jump into it just because you want to be the boss, well, let me tell you something. There's a reason why there's a difference between a boss and a leader.
Right.
Okay. You want
Okay.
to, you want to not push your people necessarily. You want to drive your people. You want to lead your people from the front.
Absolutely. That was the one thing. Our captain, the who was one of the paid people, our captain, when he was in the right seat, we probably just cleared the tarmac, and he was giving us directions already.
Mm-hmm.
He would turn around because we didn't have radios to talk with, so we'd open the window, and we were in the back seat. Was open in those days,
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh, I remember the old open cabs.
well,
I
it
remember
wasn't
the
open.
old
It
open
wasn't like a
cabs.
crown. It was just we were off the tailboard. That was
Yeah.
just right when the tailboard stopped.
No,
Tailboard,
no, 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 no. I'm talking about on the back.
yeah,
No, the
just the
bench
back,
seats on
right?
the back or the seats between the engine. Yeah, no, no, I
Exactly.
know
Yeah.
that. Oh, yeah.
So he would turn around and say, "Okay, um, the call is going to be on the east side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
So whoever was behind the driver, he says, you're going to do this, and you're going to do that, and come and do that, and come and meet me at the front of the engine or wherever I am, and we're
Mm-hmm.
going to do together." And I can't think of a call that he didn't do that, give us in the backseat direction as soon as we were on the way, just and waiting for any more information. And then he would amend it. And then when we got there, and I remember my first working fire where I was on the nozzle, he was the officer with me, and I thought the guy who was riding in the other jump seat was going to be backing me up. We had talked about what he should do
Mm-hmm.
after the captain said I was going to be on the nozzle, and uh, I thought he was there, so I just did what the captain told me
Mm-hmm.
and followed it. And we got a good knockdown on the fire. It was one of those typical kitchen with the extension with the laundry area, and one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And we knocked it down in about a minute and a half, and then we did the overhaul, started the overhaul. But he came to me afterwards and he says, you did a great job. And your first thing, you listened, and you did exactly what I told you.
Mm-hmm.
And look how fast we got it out, because you did it well and you did the way I directed. He says, so now I know that I can work with you on the nozzle again.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a great opportunity that's why I put you on it. So when I said to him, I said, well, got to thank, and all of a sudden I realized it wasn't him behind me,
Yeah.
different guy. And I said, what happened to so-and-so? He says, go talk to the chief about that. But what's his name? He did a great job,
Yeah.
humping the hose for you. I
Yeah.
said, oh yeah, he was terrific. I had no pressure at all. He did really well. So I said, okay. I went to the chief and I said, what happened to so-and-so? He goes, when we got to the fire point, he was not comfortable making an entry.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, you're not going to kick him out, are you? He goes, no. This is a volunteer department. I'm going to find a place where he's going to be a valuable member for us.
Okay.
We do a lot of ground stuff. He'll do ladders with us. He's going to be good. He's going to be really good. Just doesn't have to make entry. And again, I paused and I said, holy smokes. It was like, life, it's like in a TV show that life freezes for a second.
Oh, yeah.
And you have the captain who just told you that you followed his instructions very well and you did exactly as told. You got a good knockdown. We minimize the loss. You have a chief who's already shown to be an excellent leader who has a guy who couldn't make that entry because of the claims.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of saying, well, he doesn't belong in this department, he says, I'm going to find another place for him to be a valuable asset to this department.
Of course.
And I said to myself, those are leaders.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he's the chief. Because he thinks that way. This was before the fire culture and that. He thinks that way, that instead of booting somebody out, he can use them for something else and keep him a valuable member.
Yep.
And he spoke it over with that kid. He was already younger than me, and it worked out great for the rest of the time I was there. That guy was there on almost every call, doing something else on the fire ground, helping whatever had to be done, just as long as it was an entry. And I think that it was the captain and the chief who were able to see that in him, that he was a kid dedicated to the task, but also had a little bit holding him back.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest, the first time any of us make entry, I don't care when it was, if it was the old days when we had no SCBA, or if it's today when you have SCBA that weighs, maybe a quarter of what
exactly.
With a steel tank and a steel frame.
Oh, that was standard. Steel tanks every day. Standards all day. Oh.
And I just said, this is who I want to be with. These are the people I want to be with because they care about the volunteers. You're not just a number or a name. You are a person that everybody knows your name, almost like the cheer song. And they care about you and how well you work within that department. And they want to give you every avenue to grow in that department.
It's a beautiful thing. And then there's another side of this that I think people who are seeking leadership roles need to consider. And, when you're a performer, like my wife, for instance, who can not walk, talk, chew gum, and just breathe at the same time without falling, because God bless her, she is clumsy in life and she knows it. First 10 years of our marriage we spent in the ER. At one point they're like, okay, are you doing this? No, I promise you, she's a ballerina. Oh, it's okay, we understand. But when you put her on stage, she takes your breath away. She can do everything and anything, twists, turns, flips, back things, tippy toe walking, the whole 9 yards, right? And I'm underselling her at this point, but she knows where I'm coming from. But the point is, a good performer usually is most nervous before they go out on the stage. They're scared because even though they're alphas and dominant, right? They're scared to perform because they don't want to mess up.
What if?
And guess what? You know how I felt when I took my test and realized I passed? Well, like I've discussed in many times before, I was 10th on the list. I was the bottom 3 of the list for lieutenant. And it was okay, though. I'm not ashamed of that. I made the list. And again, this goes back on the whole, well, anybody can take a test concept. Does that mean number 1 was the best? No, he was a great officer. Number 1 was and a very good friend of mine, and he is a phenomenal officer. He's got a lot to learn. He was the youngest of all of us in our class of officers. But here's the thing about that. I was able to observe him and all of the others prior to me and to see what they were able to accomplish and what worked for them, what didn't work for them, get feedback from them. But don't think there wasn't a level of underlying fear when I was given the phone call and told, hey, you're going to be a Lou in about 2 weeks, get ready. And I was like, okay, now the world just stopped. And I'm thinking to myself, oh boy, I'm about to put a bugle on my collar, and am I ready to do this? And an old friend of mine rest in peace. He was one of my greatest mentors in the labor side of things, Manly Bolin from Jacksonville. I love that man like he was a father. And he took me under his wing with some great leaders like Larry Osborne, Walt Dix. Oh God, you name it. All the way up to Harold Shapeberger at one point, and I've had the pleasure of shaking his hand on a few occasions, and a good leader too, regardless of the political side of things right now in the society, unfortunately. Bob Carver, who was a Putnam County boy, Jacksonville fireman. He was one of the longest serving presidents of the FPF. I was blessed to have those men in my life, but Manly treated me like a son and gave me so much to build me to where I was. And one of the things he said to me when I was ready to move to Lake County, and I asked him, I said, one day I'm going to be an officer. And I'm a little nervous about this. I mean, I'm 31 moving into Lake County. All right. A little late in my life at this point. And I hope I'm ready. He goes, son, you're never ready. And it's okay to be afraid. And it's okay because you're going to screw up and you're going to make mistakes. And you know what? You're going to learn from those mistakes because he went to driver. That was his position. He drove the shit out of trucks in Jacksonville. Loved every day of it. Pardon my French, by the way. But he told me, and it impacted with me. It resonated with me in so many ways that you're going to be afraid. And the good ones are afraid. The people who were afraid to take that role are the ones that are going to be cognizant. And when I say cognizant, I mean they're going to be aware that there are things that are going to be expected of them, so they better be on their A game. And it's okay to make mistakes. Being afraid doesn't mean you can't make mistakes. Making repetitive mistakes is a problem. But if you learn from each mistake, it's okay to have that little bit of fear. Because remember, human resource management, you're now leading a crew. Every decision you make up into a chief coming to that scene and taking over for you or supporting you or leading you behind the scenes while you're doing the work, you're now responsible for the lives of the people on that truck. Your life is second to theirs. Your life doesn't value as much as theirs does. And I say that because my crew comes before me. I shield my crew. They are my crew, my brothers, and my station. And that's the pride we have in my house. And it's important that a leader understands that it's okay to live with a healthy dose of fear, but don't let it consume you. Embrace it and use it for the better. Make those mistakes, learn early. If you're going to vomit in the trash can day one, do it, because Lord knows I did. I was scared to death the moment I put that white shirt on and walked into the station and said, holy crap, they're going to call me Lou now. But yet at the same time, even through the mistakes I've made and trust me, the conversations, the awkward ones I've had with battalion chiefs about my tactical decisions, it actually made me stronger and made me better. And I still have a ton to learn because a leader never stops learning.
Exactly.
And that's the other side of it, Steve. When you become a leader, you become a student of a greater cause, and that is a student of leadership. And that is why I push so hard to get my degrees, why I push so hard now to get into my master's program, why I'm continuously teaching as much as I can, COVID aside, why I'm doing this podcast, why I'm trying to stay engaged with people, because there's a message out there, and you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to walk the perfect walk to be a leader. You don't have to pretend to be something you're not. I'm a fat guy with a great mustache, but I love my crew. I love my craft. I love my brothers and sisters. And if there's something I can give back to them, and if they listen and learn something from me, that's great. If not, and they're not interested, that's okay too. But it's okay because at least a leader knows they can be afraid, they can make mistakes. But then again, it goes back to mentoring, and that's why we're sitting here today, because we're talking about mentoring and leading.
We'll wrap up this segment with this little story. I've been teaching students for their bar and bat mitzvah since two months after my bar mitzvah in 1965. I've taught over 1,000 students. And one of the things I've always used for them when they're nervous, and either during the tutoring session or getting ready for that Saturday morning, tell them, look, you ever see in the circus the guy or the gal who walks on the tightrope? Yeah. I said, there are two ways to go across that tightrope. You can carry a balance beam with you that you know how to use to help you, or you can think, I don't need it. I walk across on my own. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, the one who carries the balance beam and is careful with every step is the one who makes it to the other side. The one who thinks he can just run across it is the one who goes splat into the sand on the floor.
Yep.
So I said, it's okay. Everything I've given you to learn from are tools. And you can have almost every one of them up there with you in your notebook to use. I don't take that away and say, okay, now do your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I said, it's up there with you. So if you know it with me, you know it. That's where it is. And
Absolutely.
it's always, that usually has always worked with those students. They understand that there's differences of using what you've learned as part of what you're going to do, as opposed to thinking that, oh, I can't use any of it, I'm on my own.
Yep.
Not. If you've learned and it's meant something to you to learn, you're going to carry that through with you, not only just for your bar or bat mitzvah, you're going to carry it through your life. That
Yep.
defines who you are. Even at the age of 13, it defines who you are, that I can do this because I've worked, I have my tools, I've used them, and I'm progressing every week. I'm doing a job. Now it's my Saturday. It's my
Yeah.
mitzvah day, my bar mitzvah day. And I would say the vast majority of those kids, I don't care if they sang like a rock star, they sang sound like a moose with an arrow in his butt running through the woods. As long as I hear it, that they're within the phrasing and stuff like that, I'll give them the greatest bravo they've ever heard, because I am so proud of them. And um,
Mazel
that's
tov.
and
Absolutely.
that's what it has to be. You have to be able to know that there's always help for you.
Yeah.
You just have to say, I'm not so good that I don't need help anymore. I'm always willing to learn. So I'll take whatever help I can get.
Amen.
All right. So, folks, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back with my guest, Lieutenant Jason Liska, we are going to talk a little bit more about maybe a little different aspect of leadership and where it goes. So we'll be right back right after these words. As always, please stay tuned. And we're back on this episode of 511 Task Force with my good friend, Lieutenant Jason Liska. And we are talking about leadership. We talked about the concept of how important that we have to grow leadership. We who have a few years in the department who are still hungry to learn ourselves, must be willing to look at the people coming in behind us and seeing, that one looks like they're really engrossed. They really want to learn. I always see them with the book. They're always doing this. They're not hanging around outside shooting hoops. They're not in the day room watching TV. They're always studying and looking like that. I think this is the kind of person that, this that we could use. That's great. But how do we get them there is the question. How do we tell that if we're that senior person or we're that officer, we see this kid, this guy, this girl who is kind of showing this, how do we convince them that this might be a good path for them?
Well, you bring up a very valid point, and something that even I struggle with at times, but yet I do agree with, is that not everybody is meant to become a lieutenant, become a battalion chief, go beyond that for that matter. Some are designed just to be lieutenants, and it's good. Some are designed to be senior firefighters. That's great. Some are designed to be Jakes on the truck, and that's what they want to do. Others follow other pursuits in the fire service, whether they go into arson investigations, inspections, pub ed, training. There's so many facets available out there for firefighters to end up getting to. But the thing is, you still have to be able to earn that spot.
Yeah.
And that requires education, that requires dedication, that requires time. And so here's a basic concept. We talked about the foundation early on in the beginning of the podcast and the importance of that. So when you look at your foundation, now you have it there. It's laid out, it's cured, you're ready to start building on it. So let's talk about the 1 to 5 year concept. And that is something I'm very, very open about. And this is what I talk about with the new people coming into the department, the new recruits, when they go in through the door or they show up to me coming out of training and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm here. What do I do next kind of attitude. And so I think about where they're at. So their foundation is just starting to cure at that point, or it has cured. And so a lot of things factor in there. So 2 things. One, depending on how old you are versus how old they are, okay, that can play a factor into how you relate to them. Okay, 77 on, my generation, I guess it would be the millennial generation technically, right? And then I guess it's Gen Z now. But when you think about my generation coming into technology, coming into all of the new cool things that we utilize today that have greatly aided our ability to expedite things, from the internet to social media to being able to send emails, and just how we communicate has even changed, right? Well, those are the kids that literally grew up with it from day one. So I went to high school. I learned how to type on a typewriter. Okay. Computer class was on an old square Mac. Okay. So, and then you think about the people when I came into the fire service who came before me and their generation. So some of them were Vietnam veterans. Some of them might have even been Korean War veterans. Some of them coming into the fire service in the 60s and 70s, right? And we're talking into the 90s, early 2000. I mean, there are people that have gone 40 plus years in their career.
Mm-hmm.
And you look back at 40 years and you look at what they've accomplished in that 40 years. And so their mindset when you walk through the door is a lot different than my mindset today when I see these new kids walking through the door, because the way I was taught was the school of hard knocks. It was shut your mouth, open your ears, earn your right to sit at the table, right? And so that could be discouraging to that generation that we're talking about now, because they don't have that same understanding of what those men and women in the fire service from just 20 years ago walking through the door, that they were brought into. That was how they were taught there, as John Dixon would say, the indoctrination into the fire service. And I hope I get his voice right. I try. But here's the thing. They're all hungry. They all want to learn. They all have that capacity to learn. They just need a little bit of guidance. Okay. And that's important to remember. But you also have to understand them. So when you say, I have nothing in common with a 20-year-old, well, that's not entirely true. I mean, I have two 20-somethings sitting in the house right now. Okay. And I understand them. I raised them. I understand who they are as people. They like video games. One does voiceover work. The other one has a lot of computer talent, is an avid reader, is probably going to be a teacher one day. And I see their potential. So that's the thing you got to remember with this generation walking through the door. And it goes following through there. Every generation walking through the door has potential. So you have to identify that potential. You have to be able to recognize that everyone has the potential to do something great. You just have to know what they need. So how do we get them there? Well, it's simple. You talk to them. Now, I get it. Most of these kids, they don't want to talk. What do they want? They want to be on this thing, this phone I'm holding up right now, tweeting, texting, chatting, book of facing, as I like to call it too. They want to do all that stuff, Instagramming or Insta chatting or Insta snapping. I make all sorts of fun of social media. And it's funny because I have a social media presence, right?
TikToking.
TikToking. Oh, well, until September. And then it's no more, say goodbye. But here's the thing. That doesn't mean you can't find a way to use that tool to teach them how to become a better communicator with you. I use this as an example because he is one of the greatest probies I've ever worked with. And this young man, and I'm very proud of him because he's the attachment to our station, so we get to work with him when he's not floated out. He was 20 years old when he walked into the fire service. And he came from a background of a law enforcement family. His uncle, his father, cops, all right? But he knew he wanted to serve, and he didn't want to go law enforcement. He wanted to go into the fire service. So he goes to standards, he gets his EMT, he gets hired with Lake, he gets in, he gets through probie school, he comes to my station. Day one, I've never seen this before. Not since, well, elementary or middle school, high school. He brought a composition book into the station, Steve. A composition book. Who uses a composition book? Not much. Well, I understand what it means.
Yeah.
But he also had his technology, and he was always in his computer, and he was always in his, phone, and he was always doing his thing. Didn't stop from training. He was hungry. He was ready. He was good. But this is the thing. He was awkward at communicating it sometimes. He wasn't great at presenting things, right? So, and he's just one of many. So how do we get them through that first year? Let's talk about that real quick, because that's a big stepping stone for them. If you're a Lou, a captain, if you're someone who's mentoring someone walking through the door of your firehouse, I want you to think about how you can relate to that technology and what you can do to turn it into making them a better communicator in a vocal sense. Because what does our job require us to do? We have to talk. We have to communicate with people. We have to be able to talk out issues. We have to be able to solve problems, critically think, and communicate the responses at the same time. But if you're only engrossed in one thing and you can't do the other, then you're going to have a problem because there's a disconnect, and that's frustrating. And I often wonder if that's why sometimes some of these young recruits fail, because I feel like the leader might have failed them, because maybe the leader didn't know how to communicate. Maybe the leader didn't know how to make that connection.
That's what I was going to,
So,
excuse me, that's what I was going to say, is that it all depends on that first approach.
right?
That's by the leader to the new kid. And
Absolutely.
if you come up there fully erect and you're the officer approaching them, then that's what they're going to see. They're going to
Yeah,
see that wall of, I'm a rookie, I'm a probie, and here's the officer coming towards me. What did I do wrong? But
absolutely.
if you just kind of saunter up and say, "Hey, how you doing? How's it going?" and you make a nice general soft approach, you can make a connection
Yeah,
there.
you can.
You've
And
lowered that curtain, you've lowered that wall that was between you and them for that instant.
they're scared enough walking in the door day one.
Exactly.
Okay, and so, and don't get me wrong, and I get this, and this is where our brother Sean comes in to the culture, right? And one of the things I remember him saying in a conversation with a group a long time back, it wasn't, well, that long ago, but it was recent, I should say, and we were talking about culture, and he's very savvy in culture. That guy has a great knack for learning how to evolve a culture, and what he wants to do, and how he sees the lack in some areas and the rise in others, and how to find that balance. And I think it was him who mentioned that culture should start in day one in your training academy when you're going into the department. I believe that was Sean who said that. And I also recognize that too. And in the cultural discussion we'll get into a second, but he made a point. It all starts in day one. The impression you give upon those candidates when they walk through the door is the expectation you set for them from that point forward. And you've got to give them the culture of the department so they understand how they're expected to act. So that's another component of that 1 to 5. They are going to adapt to that culture or they're not. And that is up to two things. That's up to their willingness to do it and an officer willing to hold them accountable to making sure they maintain that cultural standard, because that is crucial. So back to Kyle, my probie. What do you think a kid his age hates the most? Again, interacting. So I teach at the fire college, the Florida State Fire College, and we have a lot of latitude as instructors. And every class I teach the 16 life safety initiatives, because that's required. And I'm part of the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, very proud of that. And then, of course, we teach other aspects of the course. So I work at the Florida State Fire College, and that's first off a blessing, because I never saw myself being able to sit in that position teaching Fire Officer 1, Fire Officer 2, the inspector programs, and most recently getting to teach, and I'm working with my boss to kind of help rebrand the PIO program in a post-COVID society. Thank God. I hope one day we get there, because it's
Yeah.
going to be great to be back in the classroom for
Doing them
sure.
both, right.
Oh my goodness gracious, it's been hard. But there are certain things that we have expectations for when you come to a class at the college, and we have a great curriculum for everything. And so one of the things we teach right off the get-go in every class is the 16 life safety initiatives. And I'm also a state advocate for the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. I wish I did more. I don't do enough. And I think a lot of it, unfortunately, has to do with the current situation with COVID and not being able to get out and gather in large areas.
Sure.
But my contribution comes in being able to at least teach that. And I teach that to my probies. I teach that to my new kids every time I get one, because that's still an impact, teaching them what those initiatives mean, right? So transitioning away from there, every day, what I had Kyle do was bring in a report, and it was a NIOSH report. And I don't know if company officers truly understand the value of a NIOSH report and the NIOSH 5 and what those 5 elements mean, and how important they are for all of us, not just the new guys, but a company officer, a chief officer, a safety officer, to understand that those reports are meaningful documents that actually serve a greater purpose because someone lost or many lost their lives in the course of doing their job. And it's something that you have to be able to reflect on, because if you don't, you could make that same mistake again. So every shift, Kyle would bring me a NIOSH report. He would sit there and present it to us, and not at the beginning of the shift. No, he would do it the following morning when the new shift was coming on with the new probie coming in the door, so that he was able to hear the report as well. And so the other things I had him do throughout the day, had him researching data, had him out there into the bay. We were doing equipment, we were doing hose drags, we were pumping, we were doing all that stuff. But again, getting back to that communications aspect, every time he did a presentation, every time he utilized his speaking skills, guess what he became?
Better.
More confident, a stronger public speaker. And guess what? That actually made him feel good because it empowered him. It actually made him feel like he could be a working component of the team. So that's one element of how do we get them there. We engage them, and we give them tasks, and we find their weaknesses. And in most cases, they're all going to be the same. Unless they're just gregarious and outgoing, they're going to be kind of not introverted per se, because in their own personal lives, they're not necessarily introverts. But in our world, they become introverts because they're afraid that if they make the mistake, they're going to get fired. So then there's year one right there. We build the foundation from year one. Year two, I look at things like, okay, what could you be doing next? And so if you come in as an EMT, right off the get-go, you should probably go to paramedic school. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And that's something our department is capable of doing. We're able to get you through medic school. But you also need to remember, and another shameless plug for the fire college, that if you're a Florida firefighter and you just graduated standards, you have 1 year and you can take a free class with us at the fire college. Doesn't matter what school you graduated from. If you're a Florida certified firefighter within 1 year of your graduation, come take a class. And I always say building construction should be the first class you take. And the reason, and as Gary Ludwig and I discussed, Chief Ludwig and I discussed in our most recent podcast, it was because a surgeon just doesn't go to surgeon school right off the get-go. You got to go to med school. And I love the way he said that. You got to learn about the body before you can cut the body. So guess what you got to learn? You got to learn about the buildings you're going to go into. You got to learn about the weaknesses of those structures. You got to understand the dynamics, what goes into them, how they're built. It's beyond type 1 through 5 now, because there's so many other things out there from the green construction world that are even more dangerous than that lightweight truss construction over your head, whether it's steel or wood. So then you got to get them into the classroom. And in my department, pump ops is a very important thing, because the moment you come out of probie school, well, we're 2-man engines for the most case. And guess what? You're either driving or you're riding if you're at a station that doesn't have a lieutenant. So we put a lot on our probationary firefighters the moment they walk in the door. And that's not necessarily the same across the country.
Right.
So then that leads into, where do we go from year two? Well, by year two, if you're not in medic school because you're already a medic and you're not starting taking classes, why not? What do you need to know? Well, if you don't know how to get from point A to point B, who's going to be there to show you? Well, that's the lieutenant or the captain who can do that, or even the senior firefighter, because they're going to be the wealth of knowledge. And if we're not putting that on them, if we're not sharing this knowledge with them, years 3, 4, and 5 are going to potentially go to waste.
Mhm.
And again, contractually, my department promotes you at 4 years. And guess what? As you have your FO1, your FO2, you're eligible. But at the same time, if you don't, have a reason why. Maybe you want to go the tech route. Maybe you want to go into the USAR world, and that's fine too. Do what you got to do, but do something in that 1 to 5 years, because it doesn't mean you have to promote at 4. It doesn't mean you have to promote at 5, but at least have a path to get there. And that's something I like to lead into with succession planning. And so with succession planning, something that is not widely discussed And I'm going to tell you, there's a handful of battalion chiefs in my department that believe in it, that know when it's their time to step out of the limelight and it's time for someone else to take their spot, they want to make sure that person who's taking their spot or whoever it is or whoever's on the list is ready to take that spot. So one of the benefits I have in my department, and this is an awesome benefit, I can put Kyle, if he's with us, as a 3-man crew or even as a 2-man crew. I can put him in the right seat, the left seat, or the jump seat if we're a 3-man crew. If we're a 2-man crew, hey, there are days the Lou wants to drive. You know why? Put him in the right seat. Give him that opportunity. You got to be able to prepare each level for the next level up, in other words. And that starts again back with human resource management. You got to promote that succession planning mentality. So you've got to know what they need. You got to listen to them. You've got to take what they want and not ignore them. You got to encourage them. You've got to inspire them and you've got to show them the path. I've created quite a few 1 to 5 year plans for firefighters, put them on document, sent it to them, and gave them the path, as Donovan Miller did for me in Lake County, day one, when I walked through the door at 31 years old in 2008. And that is something that is meaningful to me, because if you can't demonstrate the path and how to get down that path, then they're not going to go much further past that 5 years, and they might not do anything more than be a bump on a log. And that's not what we want. We want to create success through succession.
That story you just told about Kyle at the station just made me realize something else, which was that whenever Rich and I would get to the station, when Roger was the caretaker, and even this other caretaker, Bruce, was kind of a good mentor as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a night call, and there were times where they would just say to Rich and I, all right, Steve, you get in the right seat, or Rich, you get in the right seat.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, you do it next time. And we'll go on the call, and they would, help us, but guide us a little bit, but we would still. And I never realized until just your story that they were probably working with the captain and the chief for Rich and I to get some time in that right seat on the calls that they felt we could. And then if other volunteers showed up, the next piece of it, the next apparatus would come in. And I never put 2 and 2 together until you just told that story with Kyle.
But it's a simple thing, and they saw potential, and you've got to see potential in every one of them, right?
Exactly.
So I was fortunate to be able to teach one of the very first pump op programs in Lake County. Through the blessing of my boss at the fire college, Frank Ennis, and the blessing of the uppers, as well as through my department, they came to me and asked me to do this. It was the most amazing request. I was so humbled by that because, one, I've never taught pump ops before. You want to talk about company officer, FO1 inspections, I can do that, no problem. You want to talk about mentoring and leadership, great. So this was a new challenge for me, because even though I can teach inspections, right, I don't necessarily like to, because it's not necessarily my bailiwick. But here's the thing. I rose to the challenge with the support of my peers, and the very man who helped save my job in 2013, coming out of my turmoil when I was 1 foot out the door, Captain Craig Gilligan, who encouraged me and stood by me and said, you got this, brother. I know you can do this. And you know what? Day one with those recruits, it was phenomenal to be able to have that experience with them. And something cool I did, a little different from my normal path of doing things. Now, I introduced them to the life safety initiatives. I introduced them to the expectations that I have. And honestly, they're very simple expectations, right? I ask for a good attitude. Okay, because I could tell you be to work 15 minutes early, make sure you sweep and mop. These are things you're going to do because that's stuff that's taught in Proby school. Let's be honest, because every day after class, they're mopping, they're sweeping, well, in reverse order. They're cleaning the bays, they're washing the trucks, they're drying the trucks, and they're putting them to bed for night, and they're getting ready for the next day. They're doing all of that stuff. So they should walk into the station ready to go. Again, John Dixon, indoctrination. I love that. It's a great word, by the way. And so it was great to be able to talk to them. But one of the things that I came to realize, and it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, I gave them an expectation. But what are their expectations of me? right? So what are they looking out of me as not just their instructor, but as the man standing in front of them with the gold bugle on the collar who's going to be teaching them for the next 2 weeks? And then, of course, what are their expectations of the department, right? So I was able to ask them that, but I told them I didn't want them to give me the answer then. I wanted them to sit back. And the second thing I asked him is, why do you want to be here? Why do you want to be in the fire service? Because I have my reasons. I know why I joined the fire service, but why did you join the fire service? So those two questions were posed, and I said, I don't want an answer now. You're going to present it to me tomorrow individually. And you're going to present with, 5-minute little report. You're going to talk to me about why you're here and what your expectations are. And then it hit me after I got their expectations. Well, we can meet those expectations in 2 weeks, 6 weeks, a year. But then what happens then? What do we do with these kids once we meet their expectations? Well, we got to find out what their next expectations are. So again, that falls in line with succession planning. That falls in line with how do we get them to the next level? You've got to keep their expectations fluid, okay, of you, all right, of their needs, because they're not going to always be completed 6 months. They could be completed tomorrow in some cases. So those types of expectations are dynamic. And that's another reason why you've got to be engaged with them, and you've got to support them and help build up the framing for their house, which I equate to that next step in leadership, whether it be the driver engineer or it be the lieutenant of the firehouse. You've got to get that framing now on that foundation to start building the structural integrity of your house.
Very true. Very true. As you said, you have the foundation, but you can't sleep in the house that night on a slab of cement.
Nope.
You don't have any water. You don't have any heat or cooling. It is what it is. But if you start framing the house and you do it carefully, and you know what you're doing, or there's somebody there to help you frame and teach you how to knock the 2x4s together, and then how to raise the wall, then you're on the way of building your home.
And don't forget something. I had my home partially built when I nuked my career, okay? I had the framing up for the most part. I might have even had the quote unquote drywall, proverbially speaking. But I destroyed my house. I nuked it. I was at a point where I was ready to just raise the building and be done with it, right? But this is where it came to me in this concept, which made more sense than anything. If it's not right, if there's something wrong, you got to be able to acknowledge when it's time to step back and remodel the house maybe and make changes. And it doesn't have to be the way you envisioned it. It doesn't have to be the way that you thought it would be, because not everything goes the way we want it to go in life. All right. If I could tell you that everything in my life was perfect leading up to today, I'd be lying to you. Because let me tell you something. I have fallen on my face more in front of people. I have failed as a lieutenant more in front of people than I've done in a long time. I failed as a father. I failed as a husband. I failed as a son. But you know what? It was all a cue. What was I doing wrong? Maybe the structural integrity in my life wasn't there. So guess what? It's time to remodel the house. It is okay to do that. You don't have to quit because you fail or screw up or think you have no other choice but to give up. Leave the fire service on your own terms, but don't leave with the chip on your shoulder and the anger and the hostility in your heart, because if you do go to another department down the road, you're only going to carry that with you, and you're only going to destroy your career even further. You'll never get ahead if you don't simply step back, take the deep breath, reset yourself, and say, holy crap, what the hell did I just do? And how do I fix it? And it's just a simple remodel sometimes.
It is very true. And, most of us are very reticent to self-criticize.
Absolutely.
But we're also too fast to self-praise. We have to find that medium, and people at my age, which is still a bunch of years ahead of you, but
you're still a young chicken.
Oh yeah, right. No eggs, but I'm chicken, but
or a rooster. You're the cock on the block, right? Just saying.
But the fact is that you learn sometimes the hard way.
Yeah.
And I've learned a couple of times through the very hard way of how to step back and say, what did I just do? And what kind of ramifications is that going to have on not only me, but those around me?
Mm-hmm.
And those are not going to be easy times
No.
for any of us.
No.
But if you taking that first step and saying, I did something wrong, or I'm not happy with what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
that's the good thing. That first step is the acknowledgement. That can lead you on your way to something better at that point. But you made a great point when you said, if you're having a tough time at one department, and that's what you take away with you, you probably are not going to make any headway in the next department if you carry that chip on your shoulder with you. You have to
Trust
be
me.
willing to open up. You know people. I know people that, and I've done this. I know what happened when I made the mistake. And the ramification was greater than I ever expected, but we lived with it. My family supported me, and we got past it. And yes, does it haunt me? Absolutely. But it doesn't control me. And that's the difference. You have to be able to tuck it away. It's not going to disappear,
No.
but tuck it away and come out and start fresh, or as fresh as you can.
You hit something hard with me, and I am regretful that I have not said this sooner. But the very woman I've been married to for 23 years that I met in a firehouse when I was a volunteer in Palm Beach County at Station 34, where my brother Craig was a medic. I remember that day. It was great. We took bets who was going to talk to her first, right? Because he was like, "Oh, I'm a little older, so I'll just take the lead." And I'm like, "No, your hair is red and curly. Mine is black and silky. So don't worry, I got you. We're good." I had a beautiful head of hair back then, right? I still won in the end because I got her hand, right? But I wouldn't be sitting here today either if it wasn't for her. And it wasn't for my 4 children who didn't give up on me. And don't think I was an easy person to live with. Don't think that I was a great guy every day as a father. Don't think that I didn't take my anger and bring it home with me. And again, that all goes into how we get them there too, because think about this for a second. Very important thing to consider. We don't want to bring it in and we don't want to bring it out. And by that, I mean, I tell these kids, leave your problems at the door. Because when I'm here with you and you walk through that door, you have to be ready to work. You got to be ready to go to work. You got to be ready to put your problems aside. If you can't, you got to come to me. I am not an all knowing, all seeing prophet. I cannot read your mind and I cannot fix every problem. But here's the other thing about being a good leader and knowing how to be part of that, getting them their process. You amass a wealth of resources that can help you get them to where they need to be, whether it's a financial issue, a personal issue, something they have issues with. Substance abuse, unfortunately, is a problem in our service. PTSD, as we know,
Oh,
we lose brothers every year to suicide. There's got to be a way to find a resolution. And if you're going to help them get from point A to point B, you have to demonstrate that compassion. We got to push forward. And that's important. And that is something a leader, you better be ready to make that plan. And I brought those problems home sometimes and made life hell for my family, but they also made me accountable.
I think we've all done that. When one of my dark times was when I lost my dad. He had a heart condition since he was 44, but my brother and I were starting a new project. I was
Mm-hmm.
leaving synagogue work. We bought 5 franchises of a video company. This was long before Blockbuster. And he was so excited for us because we were trying something. And he had wanted to leave the company many times that he worked for. He worked for them for 40 some odd years. When he finally retired, at the age of 62 and a half. His salary was $21,000 as a head buyer for a large regional supermarket chain. The guy he had to train to come in after him was getting paid $60,000 right out of college, never had a day in a retail establishment. And, my dad was always egging us on and telling us how proud he was and stuff like that. And I said, Pops, what happens if we fail? He goes, all you got to do, you look in the mirror. If you say you did the very best you can do, then close that door, lock it up, and walk away with your head held high. And 2.5 months before we opened, he passed. And I was home. I happened to be home visiting. So I was the one who started taking care of him. My mom came to me, she goes, Dad wants to know if you'll help him shave. Help him shave? My dad's he taught me how to shave. I don't need to help him shave. But I could tell right away when I saw him, he was in distress. So I called 911, ran down to the car, got my jump bag, brought it in, started taking vitals, taking care of him. Ambulance came. And I said, okay, let's get an IV started. He says, we can't. I said, what do you mean? He says, we're only EMTs in Massachusetts. They haven't passed the paramedic bill yet. I said, we got to get some beryllium in him right away. He's in VTAC. He says, we can't. We just got to keep him stabilized the best we can with oxygen. And we got him to the ER, got through the ER okay, got upstairs, was in a room in the CCU, and awake talking to us. And he said, go get your hair cut, because he hated long hair. Only because the only reason why, when he had his first heart attack when he was 44, he didn't get a haircut for 4 weeks and he hated it. He couldn't shave himself. So it was a sign of weakness to him. Long hair that reminded him of his weakness. So I went to my cousin. I was there for maybe 3 minutes when the phone rang at their salon. My cousin said, it was my brother. He says, you better get back real fast to the hospital. By the time I got there, he was gone. And I just became a miserable son of a bitch. That's who I was. I hated everything. I gave up on my religion. I hated life. How could this happen? He was so excited. He couldn't do it himself. He was always afraid that he wouldn't be able to support his wife and 3 boys. And this was the opportunity, and he's taken from me now. And it got to the point where I was given an ultimatum to either get my act straight or I'd be doing a solo act.
I'm going to piggyback on that. I know we've got to close. But my grandpa, my papa, Elmer, the fire chief, we were very close. My grandfather passed away when I was very young, the captain. And my grandmother, my Nana, my papa I was like their second chance in a sense, because, there was a lot of turmoil in my family and reasons I'll disclose to you personally. But my grandfather and I were very close. We would see each other every year. We would hang out together. I went to Chicago many times before my grandmother passed away, and then many times after that, right? Visiting him in Schaumburg, where he had moved to with her. And every Sunday, when I was in my 20s, 18 roughly it started, not long after my grandmother died, every Sunday at 8 a.m., I would call him 7 a.m. Chicago time. And we would have about a 30-minute conversation. And we talk about everything. But it was his time between getting out of the shower and dressed and getting ready to go to church. That went on for years. And then all of a sudden, in 2003, I called one day. He didn't answer. And I called back. And I called back. And one of the last phone calls we had before that was, I was working in Putnam. And I was boasting about a structure fire. And one of the things he said to me was, Jace, we don't boast or joke about fires in homes. I immediately snapped back. I said, yes, sir. He goes, someone losing their home is not something we discuss in a jovial manner. A structure fire is a terrible thing. Someone is either lost in it or they've lost everything. And I said, oh, Jesus, he's right. And then the following weekend, I tried calling him. I'm pretty sure it was that last conversation. So I ended up getting a hold of my aunt up there. Turned out my grandfather had had a stroke. And he was on his way to church. He went down in the hallway, the corridor of his apartment building, and somebody found him and they sent him up there. And he was okay, right? He came home. I talked to him in the hospital throughout the course of his time there. This was roughly October. Well, not even a week or so after coming home, he got very sick. And I remember him calling me and telling me that he had cancer. And he had esophageal cancer, which is bad on its own.
Yeah.
I mean, cancer, period, right? And he said he was okay. He sounded good. He was going to get treatment. They were going to do what they had to do. Surgery wasn't an option, but they were going to do radiation. They were going to do their thing. And this was now transitioning into November. And I knew I had to get up there. And so I did. I went up and I spent 13, 14 days. I spent almost 2 weeks in Chicago staying at my aunt's house. And every day I drove from Brookfield to Concordia Hospital in Elk Grove, just outside of Schaumburg. Every day I spent with him from sunrise to sunset. And I spent Thanksgiving, first time I ever spent it away from my family. It was hard, but I had to do it for my grandfather.
Sure.
And we talked, shared stories, his pride, everything I was doing, the family, how proud he was of my children, my wife, and everything. And then I had to leave. And then we spoke periodically, of course, because he had bad days he couldn't talk and good days where he could. And then December 16th, I got a phone call. You need to get to Chicago now. And by the grace of God, everything worked out because I could get a flight up and back for $280. So I left on the 18th. I remember the day before I was working shift and I had a cell phone and I was running a patient code 3 to the hospital. And I know this is going to sound terrible. I was an EMT. No, I was the medic in the front that day. I'm sorry. And we were going. Oh, Jesus. Yeah, I remember that very clearly. It was 2003. And I answered it. We were in a straightaway, so I was good. And it was my aunt telling me that my grandfather was asking for me. He was not doing well. So she was going to put the phone next to his ear. And I talked to him. Never got the response out of him. But I told him, I said, listen, if you got to go, you got to go. You know, I told him I loved him. And I gave him everything that he needed to know. And I was going to be on a plane in less than 18 hours. And I was. As I was landing in O'Hare, all I could think of was getting to where he was. And the hardest part was he was an hour away from where I was landing in O'Hare, right? So it's like, oh shit, Chicago traffic, here we go, right? I remember getting off the plane and my cousins Phil and his little brother were there. And they met me at the gate. I'm sorry, outside of the gate because this was post 9/11. Right. Couldn't do that. And as we're walking out to the garage, one of the things that really hit me was when that phone rang, I knew. And Phil got the call that Papa had passed away just 15 minutes prior, and it was while we were landing in O'Hare. I lost one of my greatest friends, mentors, and allies. You know, the reason why I became a firefighter. 2 things I got from that. I got his badge. And we were able to line up a procession for him from his service to his grave.
Oh, that's nice.
That is why I do what I do. Because brotherhood still lives even after him not being in the fire service for 50 years. So I close on that. And I thank you for this time and for your beautiful story. And I thank you for letting me share mine.
Well, as I said at the beginning, we've worked hard to find the time to get you on the show. We talk a lot in between.
We do.
Which I treasure, but I'm glad.
Me too.
I'm glad we put this together. And I hope that those who listen understand that we're both teachers. I never was an officer, but we're both teachers. And that's what I've been all my life. And so hopefully in this podcast, we've provided a little more information, but in a softer manner, that the correct approach that we talked about at the beginning of this segment. It's not what you teach, it's how do you approach your student.
Amen.
Amen. That's what's important.
Amen. And you're a beautiful person, and I love you as a brother. You know that. I love you with all my heart. And I thank you for this wonderful opportunity to speak to your listeners and to be able to share my story and my messaging.
It is my pleasure. And the feeling is mutual. Folks, if you're listening to the audio, there'll be a little more coming up. For the video on YouTube, thank you for watching. Stay safe and stay well, and we'll be back soon. Bye-bye.